world of a mind that is wandering beneath your feet. This is the podcast for those that wonder. This is a podcast, if you dare to subscribe. Open the doors as we take you into the mind of a burger. Hi guys, and welcome to Mind of a Burger. We've changed the podcast. I didn't talk about my imaginary friends or anything in the last podcast. So, and what I'm going to do is start the podcast with talking about just everything and whatnot. Just to let you know, the podcast goes out every Tuesday night. I'm not recording this on a Tuesday. I'm recording this on a cycle of 3 days or 4 days, because there's the admin that goes for this podcast. So now I did this podcast in just to tell you guys how this podcast works. So I will not be recording it. Basically, when I do the podcast, I won't be I'll be doing it all in one. I can record it over 4 days as long as it goes out on the Tuesday night. But the idea of the podcast is it goes out on the Tuesday, so it doesn't matter if we haven't recorded it on the Tuesday, as long as we recorded it before the Tuesday. So it might mean that I record it on the Thursday, Friday. I might record it on a Friday night or something. And then on a Saturday, put bits more stuff together, then whatever, and then just kind of make sure that everything is polished off. But as long as it goes out on a Tuesday, it doesn't really matter. But on the Monday, I will be getting the script ready in the office while I'm doing other bits and pieces, because this is my second job now, everybody. Can we applaud that? This is going out to I nearly said autistic community. Autistic community. I know there's there's a few podcasts that are geared to autism, but it's more kind of YouTube videos and blogs, and I know a lot of people can read that stuff. But I got an email from Buzzsprout. That's the people, big shout out to them. That's the people who I submit the podcast to. And they do whatever they need to do, but I'm hoping that they submit my podcast to iTunes, and hey, if you're listening to it there, then fantastic. But the idea of the podcast is to reach the podcasting community too. As you probably don't know, or probably aren't fully aware, I am a a broadcaster. That's my real job. I don't get paid for it, but it is my real job. So basically, I go to a studio every week and do Muggle Radio, and I'm going to do a geek podcast soon for all the geek news stuff that I do, maybe something else that I do, whatever. But Magic Silver Room, I'm also going to do a podcast as well for those that know me and start yelling at me. But I'm not going to use my DJ name or my pseudonym name. I'm going to use my real name on this podcast, which is Stephen Ball. I don't like using that name in other circles just because, well, I'll come to that. Hey, maybe that's something that I'd like to come to. But in this podcast, I'm going to talk about my imaginary friends. For those that go, whoa, Stephen, there's a Facebook page called Imaginary Friends. What's that all about? Well, that's going to be answered in this podcast as well, because that's an elephant that's always locked up in the room, and we're going to unlock it and unleash it. And actually, when we come to the Imaginary Friends, it'll be like a little radio play for you as well. So, but as always, wherever you are, whether you're in the shower, in your car, even though there's a description and little bits for the podcast, there's even a Facebook page for this podcast, but that's not really important. The important thing is that you're listening to this. The important thing is that you are listening, wherever you're listening, whereas on your car radio, where it's on your fancy smart speaker thing, wherever it may be, headphones, earphones, whether you're in bed, in the car, making love, that's not really important either. But the most important thing is that you're listening. And obviously, I'm going to say if you want the Imaginary Friends bit, fast forward to it because it's going to be a good bit. I have kind of over-exaggerated on a few things, but it's sort of soap opera-ish, non-soap opera-ish. And I haven't gone to certain environments to record, but please do note that, I'm trying to be a storyteller when it comes to Imaginary Friends. And there will be a part of the podcast where I won't have the Imaginary Friends with me in later episodes. Now, there's a reason why I've changed the name to The Mind of a Burger. One is I used dictation to name the page, and it just wasn't having it, and I was being really lazy. My laziness kicked in. I just thought, I'm going to call it Mind of a Burger. And I like the whole Asperger's thing, this whole kind of Asby thing. There's so many Asby things out there. There's Asby World, there's Asby this, there's Asby that, there's Asby the other. So to have something else, and also I thought I wanted to share my humour. I wanted to call it the Overcooked Burger, but then I thought, they probably might think that it's about food. It's not. It's not. And number two, it may offend people. And I know there's people that's looking to be offended, but yeah, there's lots of people that, well, we'll just put it this way, they're easily sensitive. May I just add, this episode is unscripted because it is. It's the second episode. The other episode has already gone out on Friday, just to give you a little taste of things. But I've decided to move to Tuesday because that's when the other episode, the untitled episode, went out. And it's going out 9 p.m. UK time. Wherever else you're listening to this, I don't know. And it's freezing cold in the studio. It is blooming cold. It's dark outside. It's miserable. It's just cold. And speaking of cold, I've got a jumper on. I was going to put my dressing gown on to make things more comfortable. I hope people are more kind of warm wherever they are. You may be wrapped up in a onesie. I don't know. So yeah, just to clarify with you what this whole podcast is about. The first episode, the Asby Family Tree one, was really, really serious. I kind of don't want this to be serious. And I want to thank somebody. I want to thank a friend. Also, I'm also doing this podcast to try and find out if there's any more sensory toys that I can get. I love sensory toys. And I wanted to do something that's... I wanted to share some sensory toys, and hopefully in the future I would like to have a whole, like a Comic Con, not Comic Con, but like a whole sort of conference thing where people go and they it's all sensory. It's all gauged on, sensory toys, sensory this, and certain sensory toys like the fidget cube, which I'll probably go and get in a minute. I have one of the best fidget cubes. I know there's fidget cubes that are better. I don't know. I've not tried them, but I don't know. Whenever I go for a fidget toy, it's always a little bit babyish. But I must add, my sister Anne, her boyfriend Lewis, a big shout out, Lewis. In fact, I want to give out a big, massive shout out to his mummy, Jackie, because the last sensory toy I got, which is next door. In fact, I need to do a geek bag episode because I haven't done one in a while. But I wanted to do one that featured everything, and I haven't got around to doing it. And in fact, I might just do it. In fact, I might put it off. For the week commencing after this podcast, so then you guys know. Because then you can go to my YouTube channel, which is the Mind Mob channel. I'll talk about that. I think in this episode, I won't dramatise the imaginary friends bit. I'll just talk about it in the sections. But also, it's going to be done every Tuesday, 9 p.m. So if anyone does have autism like me and they like routine, but some a bit more stricter on their routine, and they don't like change, because we don't like change. Especially people who've got autism, we don't like change. It's horrible. So for that, the podcast won't change, and it will have a script, because I go off on tangents as I just did then. But getting back to the sensory toy that Lewis's mummy got me, it's fantastic. It's basically a flashy sausage. I call it a wand. It's basically a wand, and it's that material, that stuff that you get in the swimming baths that you sit on. It's like a big sausage. It's like people use it to put under their arms, those aerobic things. You'll know what I mean. It's that material, foamy material. It's nice and squidgy. And there's a button at the bottom, and when you press it, it flashes, and you press it again, it flashes fast. You press it again, it flashes slow, and you press it again, it turns it off. And that's really, really good. I've got some sensory balls. I want to talk on the sensory balls before I get into my next feature in the podcast. I do segments in this podcast. And I think my next segment is going to be talking about stuff. I was going to do tip of the day, but I don't have one. I had one for last time, which was get some fresh air. I think I'll just say get some fresh air. There you go. There's your tip of the day. It's going to be come in the beginning of each podcast. And the tip of the day is kind of, again, a little bit of a pun. For those who are into computers, it's a little thing on the desktop, usually reminding you of something to do with the computer. Like, click a certain thing or whatever. My tips of the day are going to be just geared to mental health. And a lot of people, for those who go to groups and get booklets that are boring, my podcast is gearing away from that. It gives you the same advice, but again, it's it's more kind of lesser boring and stuff like that. I do want to talk about something in a future podcast, but I won't talk about it till we come to a future podcast. So I want to talk about my sensory toy collection, because I really, really want to talk about it. And I know I love my balls. And last year, the beginning of last year, I'm an eye poker. I poke my eyes, but I got fascinated with sensory toys. I really, really did get fascinated with them, to the point where people, for my birthday, got me the wrong sensory toys. And I wanted to talk to my sister about it, but I'm talking with you guys on the podcast about it now. So I got a slimy ball. A friend of mine got me a slimy ball. And I'm wanting to... At the moment, I'm keeping hold of it. But I don't know whether I should swap it with another sensory toy. So I might swap it with a fidget spin, if anyone's got a really cool fidget spin and they want a slimy ball and I want a fidget spin. But I wanted to sell it, but then I thought, but I'm not going to tell the person that gave it me that I'm getting rid of it. It's just, I don't like the feel of it. I'm sorry, I do collect sensory balls, but I go for certain ones. I don't go for the slimy ones, and they're very popular at the moment. They're really popular. I like a ball of jelly, and they're really popular. And I wish that I liked it. I wish that I don't know. Part of me wants to keep it, part of me doesn't. But if I see something really cool, I might swap it for that. I just feel ungrateful for saying it. But I did get rid of one slimy ball. It looked like a ball of snot, and it's like it did like someone had picked their nose, put it into a ball, and it was someone gave it me at a rave that I was doing, because I do special raves, and they gave it me at a special rave, and anyway, yeah, that's another thing I want to talk about on the podcast. But at the moment, we're talking about sensory toys. So my sister's boyfriend, he knows what sensory toys to get me, which is why I don't ask anybody else for sensory toys, because I know they're going to get the wrong thing. So I got a fidget cube, which I only use here. I might ask for another fidget cube, because I want a fidget cube that I can take anywhere, and doesn't matter if I lose it or not. So I do need another fidget cube. I'm worried about losing this one. It's like the crown jewel of my fidget toys. And it's the most geeky thing. And I read that fidget cubes are really cool to have. And I want a fidget cube that I take everywhere. I want a fidget cube that I take to work, to blah blah. Because I'm starting to do that with my balls now. Like, I'll have a ball I take to work. I'll have a ball I take, to church and stuff. And it's really cool. But a fidget cube, the idea was to, have a feel that I was gaming and fiddling with switches. Because I do fiddle with switches. In fact, at work, we have a TV. I'm not going to talk too much, just in case somebody from work listens to this podcast. But at work, we got a TV, and I was stretching, and I accidentally touched the button. I thought, oh no, and it turned the whole thing off. It just tells the time, and when you put one of the sliders up, it gives a light on the screen. But I'm actually fascinated with how the TV works. Again, on the podcast, I'm not going to discuss it in case somebody else from work tunes into the podcast. So, fortunately, I can't talk about the fancy clock that we have at work. I wish I could, because it's something I love. But there's another fidget toy that I definitely want, and that's I've seen a toy pinball machine, and I want one. I just want one. But it's one of those things. If I see it, I'll swap it. I've got something that I can swap it, but well, no, actually, no, I can't swap that because I got that. I can't Comic Con. So yeah. But also, I want to talk about me being having autism, and I have visual impairment, and I've spoke on visual impairment on my Leber's congenital anaerosis. So I have a visual impairment, and when you have Asperger's in the as well as have visual impairment, it's more difficult because it's not seen on, and there isn't many visually impaired people that are autistic. And I've been on the web, I've done my research, and I spoke to someone, and there isn't very many people. I'm not one of the first, but I'm still wanting to find somebody who's got the same difficulty as me, the same issues, same problems, whatever. I don't suffer with my anxiety isn't as bad as someone with Asperger's should, or someone with the autistic spectrum should be. And the reason being is because I have anxiety with one thing, and it's when I eat egg, I think I'm going to get the eggy burps. So it's just the one worry. I wanted to discuss that. And if anyone's eating while listening to the podcast, I do apologise. There's no warning. Another thing as well is that the thing is I find communication, like someone will say something to me, but if I don't have it written down, I'll say it back completely different. So my brain is ran on like random access memory. The bits I remember, though, are the bits sometimes I want to remember, not some of the bits I need to remember. So it's just strange how that occurs. So yeah. And I did this podcast because I thought, I hate writing posts on social media. And there is no way for me to do an audio post on social media. And I've been in trouble in the past for doing live videos. Some people may know. And then I started doing the podcasting. And I found out that if I did an hour-long podcast, I could say everything that I needed to say. And if I don't know what I'm saying, I can press the stop button, rewind, re-edit, which is better than social media post. I'm still on social media, but probably this year, one of the resolutions is I won't be as active on social media when I'm working. So on the Mondays, probably won't be as active as I will be on the Tuesdays, and so on and so forth, even though I've got other bits and pieces I need to do. So basically my Monday afternoons will be taken up by not every Monday afternoons, because I need to do other things, I need to do other bits and pieces, but I'll start writing the content for the podcast, which needs to be done. And I'll give myself an hour to do it because it depends. And if I feel that I'm not going to have time that Monday, Sunday, Monday, those are the 2 days where I'll be getting the material, getting the script together for whenever I do the podcast next. And Tuesday it goes out every 9 o'clock Tuesday. It's going to be finished and out by then on the website, so you guys can. It might not be. I'm saying it goes out by 9 o'clock. Whether it be live by then, depending on how long it is. But it's definitely going to be out on Tuesday. I might try and post it a couple of hours early, just in case it doesn't get on that time schedule. Because the guys on the website, they've got to get it on the servers, they've got to refine it and everything. So all that rendering business. So I'm now going to talk about a really boring part. My Asperger's story starts with the imaginary friends, really. Which is, I'm skipping that because the imaginary friends story is going to be on this blog too. I want it to be on this podcast. Why am I calling it a blog? Well, it is a blog actually. I'm doing it in a bloggy style. I'm talking to you guys in the bloggy form. So basically, my Asperger's started. The seed, the cocoon, started after my dad left. I'd say that's when the seed started to grow, or we'll say the seed started to be planted. My dad left when I was about 8, and it isn't really important. But I was playing with my cars in my bedroom, as one kid does, waiting for my real dad to come home, because my mum said, Stephen, when your dad comes home, because it used to be the routine, because we used to go the caravan quite frequently, whatever. But on a Sunday night, it would be, I'd play my cars, I'd take all the cars out my box and play with them, and then I'd put them away. Then my mum would come in, whatever. I'd have my bath and whatever, and then my dad would come in and he would put me to bed. He'd put me to read me a story. He'd put a disc on. Sometimes if he didn't have time to read me a story, he'd put a CD on. So we had that little time. So it'd be whatever. And that evening I'd come in. I'd had my bath, my pyjamas on, my slippers on, my dressing gown on. I was playing my cars, and when we come up, and she said, well, okay, if your dad comes home, fine. And later that night, he didn't come home. And I basically added 2 and 2 and got 4. And hey ho, I just knew that things were changing within those few weeks, whatever. But it didn't, the problems didn't occur till the September. So we're fast forwarding to then. But I wanted to give you guys the picture. And the one issue was me talking to myself. Because I'd had the imaginary friends and it'd been addressed, but the community of imaginary friends was growing vastly. It had become a boiling frog problem. I think it became a boiling frog moment, and me talking to myself became an issue. But there were other issues as well. In the other episode, I didn't talk about it properly, but there were other issues. um, which we'll come to. So I remember I would, I was getting into Star Wars, and I was at school, and Star Wars got me through primary school. It got me to literature. It got me into reading. I couldn't read Star Wars books, but I remember my friend at the time would write bits of text because I had a teacher in the class and she would do text. But this one day, my friend did me something. He'd do me a few sentences, and one of them was about Darth Vader. It was about. I remember I had to read it in Mr. Waite's class, and I remember, Darth Vader, and that was the best piece of text I had. And then I lost it. I lost a lot of things when I went into high school. So yeah, I was really into my Star Wars. My music wasn't so much a big thing. It was a big thing, but it wasn't a big thing, if you know what I mean. But I used to have a friend who used to give me Hendrix tapes. It would keep me quiet, as I was playing my Star Wars figures. I had Toy Army figures as well, because I was getting into Red Alert and Army figures. So a friend of mine got me Toy Army figures, and I would sit and play with my Army figures. But I when I left primary school and I got into secondary school, things were a bit they start to go down a spiral. I was starting the teenage years, and I'm going to leave the puberty stuff out for another day, for another episode, because I want to talk about that stuff. We all go through it, folks. And that was the moment for me to stop recording because I couldn't think what to say there. But that was a moment in my teenage years, where I just felt I had to, get a grip of things a bit. But I had twin sisters as well, so things were taking a twist and a turn. But also, I was just feeling like misunderstood because I only had a visual impairment and nothing else. So obviously when people did know, it wasn't a shock. It kind of just blew over, I think. It was like, oh, he hasn't got this. And that was to do with the imaginary friends, and it was like, well, hang on, we can fix this problem. We can stop you from talking to yourself, because that's not normal. So you must get rid of your imaginary friends, and so be it. But that's like, for instance, that's like somebody with Tourette's. That's like telling them to stop them from doing their tics. It's like somebody with it's like somebody with it's like somebody with a limp, and you're telling them to stop limping. With me, it was like me. I see it and still see it as a mental limp, and my talking to myself has never been a habit. It's not been like a drug habit where you take drugs and you have to keep taking drugs. Even though there was an addiction in the early days, there's more like a creative spam. It's like, well, the natural fact, it's like watching something you shouldn't watch, or listening to something you shouldn't listen to, you know. And it's part of our human nature. If someone tells you not to do something, you carry on doing it. And I wish the time that somebody told me, if somebody just ignored it, and people just let me go about my daily business. There's two good things that wouldn't have come out of it, and the two good things that have come out of it is me being totally rebellious, me being a nonconformist type of person, and me saying that, basically, I mean, when I'm out the house, I do sometimes talk to myself in town, and I don't care if anyone's around about or whatever. I think if they're uncomfortable with it, they should move away or just ignore. Why should they question it? We're not living in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, or the 90s. And I just want to put that out there. Okay, in my street, I'm more aware of it. Sometimes I'm in church. Because if I'm in church, sometimes if I'm in church or home, or if I'm near, like my gran or that other side of the family, I'll hold it back. But it's like, I don't know, it's something, sometimes I'm ashamed of it, but sometimes I'm not. And I have to sort of say that the talking to myself, even now, hasn't stopped to this very day. And even though there was a part of my life where, I was allowed to talk to myself if I had a phone, and it was that was encouraged. If I had the phone, a toy phone, then a lot of people wouldn't mock me as much because they see, oh, you're on the phone. And there's one funny incident that happened when I had my toy phone. I was playing with my toy phone, and I wasn't even talking to myself as much this day. Well, I was, but then I was getting to this point in town where I was just playing with the phone. I had it held up to my ear, and I was playing with the phone, because that's what I was told to do. And this guy came up, grabbed it off me, and said, "Oi, Mum, I'm doing my shopping." Blah, blah, and then he gave it back. But it was me trying to be educated what's acceptable and non-acceptable. But when you grow up and get your own mind, or say you become, when you get your own mind and you learn of said such things, you learn that maybe there's some things that, I don't know, having a phone, even now, if I'm talking to one of my imaginary friends on the toy phone, a lot of people won't see that as an excuse or anything. In fact, a lot of people won't even bother. So this has kind of been me kind of uncomfortable to talk about, but I always think that if the information isn't out there, then you'll never know. And have I heard my imaginary friends walk around? Well, that's a question that will be answered later on in the podcast for those that stick around. I think we're going to move on to the broadcasting industry, mental health in the broadcasting industry, and this is just going to be anybody's got mental health. So the next bit isn't really an Asperger's bit, but I just thought I would give this information a bit like the tip of the day to those that hopefully are going to walk into that sector. So stay tuned. So this is the section that you've all been waiting for. It's called Mental Health in the Broadcasting Community, or going into broadcasting with the mental health. I'm only going to keep to radio because that's what I know and what I'm basically what I can say about. I'll leave that little bit in. What I'm qualified to say. So basically, mental health in broadcasting. If you have anxiety, I would basically say take baby steps into broadcasting. Maybe look at hospital radio before you go into community radio, and probably even bigger radio stations, because your anxiety is going to be on who's watching you, who's listening to you, all that kind of thing, who's interacting with you, and also the peers that you work with. And obviously, I've seen a few people walk out of radio because their mental health, and sometimes they don't come out on the air, which is fine if you're not in your comfort zone. Again, that's another bad thing to do. Yes, I have told people on air, like I'm telling you in this podcast. Do I think that you should come out with your mental health problems on air? Yes, I do think you should. Because if you don't, your audience will never know. And even though my first producer, I'm not going to name, basically said it's your choice whether you say you've got this or that or the other, I decided, well, it's important for my audience to know, and it's important for anybody listening to know or working with me to know, because if something comes up and you're trying to hide it, like with anything, then if it becomes an issue and people don't know and you disappear off the radar, one, you're probably never going to get a chance, and two, people aren't going to support you in the best way that they can. And have I tried to support people with mental health in the broadcasting industry? Yes, I have, but it's not helped them as much as I thought it would, because they said they would and they didn't. So, yeah. And unfortunately, that's all I have to say on this topic. But if you think that that radio is for you, then do it. If you don't think it's for you, don't do it. Take baby steps. And even now, I'd say start a podcast. Try doing a podcast. Do hospital radio. I don't know, be a guest on a friend's internet radio station before you go into the bigger steps, or you take the bigger steps by actually going to a proper studio and doing a live internet show yourself. So there's just a few little tips that I would say. And I'm sure some other careers guide would tell you the very same thing. I just thought I would cover it because it's just a thing that I want to cover. And I hope you enjoy this bit. Now on with the rest of the podcast. Just a bit of silence there because we're going to move on to the next section, and it's going to be the imaginary friends bit. So we're going to be answering a lot of questions on imaginary friends. So stay tuned. Well, welcome back. I'm glad you've stayed tuned to this part of the podcast. And this is the Imaginary Friends part of the podcast. And as you know, you'll have probably known that this became a problem later on in my life. But at the first part it wasn't. And I was about 5 or 6 when I got my first imaginary friend. I was playing in the... No, I was 5. I was playing in the garden. And my first imaginary friend I met was Gress. Can't describe him much, but we met on the swing, and then we met later on another day. We would basically say, see you later. He would jump in his car, and then I'd go to my nan's or wherever. When like he started living in the same place, or we started meeting a lot and stuff, then, you know, it became a bit more. And there was a few more imaginary friends. There was Hutzer, Proclamus, there was Key, Lur, Adam, and Woman. And those people changed. When I was 8, I met my first, another imaginary friend, called Tom, and he basically helped me through things. We'll say that much. If you didn't listen on in the earlier parts of the podcast, you'll know that there was a difficult patch in my life, as any other. But it didn't affect me that much. That was a divorce. So, moving on. Obviously, this, things were becoming a problem, but things grew. I got a building business in 2000, and Charles was born. Well, he wasn't born. My grandparents brought him back from Llandudno, so the story goes. He was a lorry driver. He'd worked in the plumbers. He'd left the plumbers, and he'd basically came to join me. And now Charles, and now knowing a bit more on his background, his mother basically had him to a boyfriend. She wasn't supposed to have him. She had to stay with some, I think it was an aunt, an uncle. Didn't really, I think she was not very, they weren't very happy with her, so there's family issues. And when they had him, he was he had to be in a flat, living with his mum, and she had to look after him on his own and stuff. Then she couldn't handle things, so she wasn't allowed to sell him or anything because it was a punishment. And she went to the laundry. She was taken away. Charles had to live with his aunt and uncle and stuff, and she had to go to the laundry. So, even though these are imaginary people, there was a story I heard that was quite real at the time, and addressed it to that. So, and a lot of the stories that I put to my imaginary friends, I'd hear from soaps and things. So that was one deep one that I added. Charles had three other brothers, which he doesn't speak to, and one, when he got married to Daphne, who is now divorced, and he's now living with another partner, Carol. Things were a bit more. I think he was kind of rejected from the family. Another person that worked. Now, I had a real office at my nan's, like I've got now, but things were a bit more different. And the Imaginary Friends community, they grew even more. We had Bernie, who was a drug dealer. Not drug dealer, sorry. He was addicted to, what are those things called? Aspirin. But he got into a few sticky situations. But he worked for me for a while, until he stole Charles's credit card, and then he got sacked. I locked him in a bedroom, actually. That's a story for another day. But yeah. So we tried to help him through things and stuff. There was another imaginary friend called Travis who he sadly passed away due to having cancer. But he was brought up in the farming trade, and he had tractors and stuff. He was a big tractor collector. He had about 2 or 3 houses, but settled to one. And so yeah. And then there was Colin, imaginary Colin, who's now an alcoholic, and apparently, from what I know, he doesn't know what's happening or anything. He's getting a bit of dementia. He doesn't know what time it is or day it is or anything, and I think he's got carers going in, but he's still drinking bottles of whatever he's drinking. And the story of Colin actually was from what's his name in Coronation Street, Peter Barlow. So that was the story for Colin I addressed. And Colin went out with imaginary Rosemary, who he hit, and she dumped him, and yeah, things just went from bad to worse. So now we have, let's see, we have, I mean, Daphne I've not mentioned. Charles's other wife, imaginary person she is. They got married, but then they got divorced because she went and slept with somebody. She went and slept with Charles's other friend, Bob, who's now passed away because he had a heart attack. Major heart attack. He's sadly passed away. So I haven't got that story from anywhere. It's just something that I made up. More imaginary friends in the community. There's Adam. He's works for Mind Mob, which is my imaginary company. I have 2 imaginary companies where I'm starting up the building company again with Charles. Actually, I have 3 because I've still got Magic Silver Room, which is a magazine. It hasn't sort of still been finished, but hopefully it will. And hopefully Magic Silver Room will be a huge thing that gets done. But that's going to be another thing for another day, obviously. And the my imaginary friends have played a huge part in my life because they've sort of helped me teach me how to do the things I do. I've got imaginary bands like Peacocks and Eprox, Blade, Salfiore, Vengus, Tradmaniac, and I think that's all of them. I'll talk about the made up bands on another day because that's another. I think that's for another podcast. I used to have an imaginary friend at school called Steve Oxford, who would getting better in contact with, but at the moment he's a bit of one of them. Now, the question that people ask me is, do I hear voices? Very interesting question. I don't hear voices, but if I put a toy phone to my ear, in the early days I could actually picture the voice on the end of the phone. Or picture what that person was saying. I have heard voices, but I don't really want to linger too much on it because it's not really something that needs to be dwelled on. And I have heard footsteps, and it's not paranormal. I know it's not there. I do know about paranormal stuff, and I will put that into this podcast because I think it's important. And I have decided to do a YouTube video on my imaginary friends, what they get up to, and actually just do a role play on them. I might get a setting and have like a bar setting. I've thought where my sister works, they've got like a bar there. It would be good. I was going to film there a while ago, so if I can get it sorted, I could probably do a little bit of a film there. Probably not where there's lots of people, but do a little bit of a film there that sort of shows the imaginary friends out and about, because it would be good to show that. There's going to be lots of street filming because you can film in a public place. There's no body that's going to say that I can stop filming. So look out for a video soon on the Imaginary Friends. There's already a Facebook page called the Imaginary Friends, and there's lots of real world footage in there. I've started treating it like, Pokemon Go, putting the imaginary friends into real world situations. It's not a huge challenge, it's not a goal or a target of mine, but it builds up the story for people. Now, I did a little bit of digging just before the podcast. I did a bit of digging for a while ago, but my sisters said it's not a big thing, you shouldn't, whatever. But now, since I've started doing a podcast and a Facebook page, are imaginary friends got anything to do with the paranormal? Right, well, this is a question that I haven't been asked this personally, but this is a question that actually someone did ask it me personally once. But this is a question that I've seen on the World Wide Web. This is a question that just people ask in general. And since I am, well educated in this, to say, what I think. Imaginary friends, the ones that I make up, are not paranormal. So we'll just let that sink in for people. So there's nothing to do with the paranormal. However, there are spirits that can act as imaginary friends, and I will do another episode. I think because this is like a whole episode, and it's really interesting. There's even creepypastas built on this. They're called tulpas, and they are demonic. Now, tulpas, everybody can see a tulpa. You can't see an imaginary friend. If you create something, you can't see it. And if you do hear it, it's like in your mind, you can sort of make yourself hear it or something. If you're a bit tired or something. Um, but something that's demonic or spiritual, like a ghost, everybody can hear that. And yeah, ghosts can act as imaginary friends. I'm going to tell this story for the podcast because it's one my mummy doesn't mind me telling now. When I was a little boy, and I only vaguely remember it now, I was playing underneath the chair, and I used to lift the chair up with my feet, and I used to make TV programs up or whatever. You know, as a kid, I used to have little thing you did and play on my feet, games, and but I used to lie down and I have my feet in the air, and I could sort of see people. Now, there was a couple of occasions where spiritual things happened. I will tell you the spiritual thing in a minute. The first spiritual thing that happened, I was underneath the chair and I was playing with the chair. And I was pushing the cushion up with my feet, you know, and I was being gentle. And I can't remember what the game was, but I remember this little voice. And it was me doing the voice, it was channeling me as an imaginary friend. And I thought, because I could mimic women's voices pretty well, like, you know. But there was this one called Betty. Now, I now know it was Ivy, actually, Ivy. But after she passed away, I remember something else. I'm going to share that with you on the podcast. Mum, if you're listening to this podcast, you might want to skip the next little bit. But I'll tell you that in a minute. Something else I remember. But yeah, I was playing underneath the chair, and I was lifting up my feet, the cushion bit of my feet, and I just remember this. I was laughing, you know. And then this little voice piped through. Little chicken. She used to call me a little chicken. And my mum burst into tears. And I thought, what have I done? I was only playing underneath the chair. And I said, when later on that day, I said, Mummy, I'm really sorry for playing with the cushion and breaking the chair. Anyway, my dad had to sort of, I was in the garden, I can't remember. I remember my dad coming out to me and he said, Stephen, he said, he got on the swing with me. He sat on the, not the swing, he just knelt down by the swing and he said, just come over here a minute, and he gave me a cuddle in the garden. And he said, you've not broken the chair. That was really strange. That's a really strange story. But I want to tell you something else strange that happened. This was probably after, before she died, I don't know. But again, I was out in the garden. Mummy was indoors. And again, I was lying on the floor. And she called me a little chicken again. And I can't remember the full details. Sometimes she would be in that Morris Minor as well. They had a Morris Minor in the garden. But that is, you know, many memories of that car. So, paranormal are imaginary friends. Are they spiritual? Yes and no. It depends. If you create an imaginary friend yourself, that's not spiritual. But demons use children, but 9 times onto a billion, you know, Um, I mean, even though the demonic things can channel themselves through, also Jesus Christ can as well. Now, I was in my bedroom one time. Again, I was laying in my bed. I cannot remember the full whatever was happening, because I used to, make these pretend television channels up and blah blah blah. And this one night, I still like feeling beards. It was a thing of mine back then. Beard fetish. And I was in my room. And I was laughing away. As you do. And the bedroom that we were in was very bright. And I mean, it was spiritually bright. I mean, if you turn the lights off, you felt sort of warm. It felt like summer all the time. I'm not saying it was boiling hot in that room, but it was. It was like there was a warmth in that bedroom. Because there was a lot of prayer in that bedroom, so you can imagine what it was like. So this one night, Mummy and Dad were upstairs. They were never far from me. My folks were never far from me. My sister was always on the top bunk, but she wasn't this night. Oh no, I'd go to bed before my sister. My sister would come up and she was responsible for putting a video on and turning it off. So she was responsible for putting videos on because she had the remote. The person on the top bunk had the remote. And I had a little light underneath on my bed that I could turn on and off. And I was in my bed one night and I was laughing away. My dad comes in. Stephen, what are you laughing at? Jesus has just tickled me. Well, as soon as they burst in the room, gone. And that was my taste of things to come. So I want to still answer the question about are imaginary friends paranormal or not. Yes and no. There's my answer to the question. It's Smarties has a better answer than me, because they always do. It's a bit like the chicken and the egg question. But I was watching something on YouTube before, because I was doing a little bit of digging just before I did this part of the podcast. And I've pre-recorded this part of the podcast. I put out episode 1 before this. That was a pilot episode. Should be episode 2 actually. This should theoretically be episode 3, but it's not. It's episode 2/1. So I'm gonna keep on imaginary friends because it was a big part of my life. It was the start of my autism. It was the Stephen, you're talking to yourself. I spoke about that earlier on in the podcast. I think today people are uncomfortable with it. I've never asked my stepdad if he's uncomfortable with it or not. I think in the early days he was. My mummy was very uncomfortable with it. My real dad was uncomfortable with it, but that's because that's something I can't mention on the podcast. But the point is, it's like I've done the Imaginary Friends page. That's had about 30 views already. No, hang on, it's had more than that. 40 views. But it's just a Facebook page. I am thinking of, I've got a book already that I'm half finishing. I'm just going to get it finished. um, but I think I'll do another book as well, which is, I don't think you should ever write two books, but I want to write one as My Imaginary Friends in the style of a journal, because I think you guys need this, and I want to make it available. But there's people that probably think people like me, and I remember at school I had to picture somebody walking down the street talking to themselves. I actually found it kind of funny because it wasn't normal. But if I did hear someone in the street, I'd probably think it was normal, but I wouldn't laugh at them. I'd probably walk by. I mean, there's a story of a story like that. There was somebody that had Tourette's, and they had their tick or whatever they call it moment, and there was a guy saying, "Are you all right?" And there was another guy going, "She's got Tourette's, you know," and you're just thinking, "Oh no, this is the avalanche situation." Where one person started off, then there's another, then what does it escalate? Why can't you just ignore it or move away? This is where conforming and non-conforming. I mean, people on the page, the imaginary friends, people. I've actually shared this on my main wall as well, so people actually can see what the page is all about. But people have started. You can see how people have stunned it because they've viewed it, but no one's commented. So that's making me think: is this shocking? In a good way, because people need to be shocked in such a good way. How do we take this out and about? How do we do this on an artistic setting? You know, because I think if this was done in a way that people saw it, then they would know how much creativity is behind something. There has been one occasion where my imaginary friends have done something that's been fantastic, and that was one time I had to do a project for I think it was something at school, and I wrote a letter to one of my imaginary friends, and the teacher, as the only time my imaginary friends have come into play, the teacher was really understanding, and she showed it to the class, and she said, "Stephen, your spelling isn't brilliant, but the way you've presented this letter is fantastic." And I was like, it's just me writing to a friend, you know. And then I actually got a personal letter. Somebody wrote to me, and it was one of my classmates. They wrote to me in class, and they sent to me in the common room. And there was another time, I remember earlier on, like the talking to myself has been seen as another elephant in the room. If you can imagine two elephants in the room, this is like the other elephant that's about to meet the other elephant. It's about to collide with the other elephant, if you will. So you can imagine two elephants in a room together. One elephant being the Asperger's, the other being, you know, whatever's causing it. And I've tried explaining it to people. And I remember once in a PE lesson, as a detention, I couldn't even describe it then, and still probably can't describe it now. It's one of those things that happens. It's a part of my mind that it feels it needs to create all the time. And Um, even from an early age, watching stuff like Rugrats and Star Wars, to now, kind of, I don't watch any television at all. I watch a lot of YouTube. I read a lot of social media. So my imaginary friends are the stories that I create for them now. I mean, I nearly lost my imagination when I was about 22, 23, but I held on to it because I thought, to carry on the creation or the creativity. And I think now people are still uncomfortable by it, but they're not saying that it's wrong. And I don't think people should say that it's wrong. I sometimes think some of the best writers must have had imaginary friends. Some of the best composers must have had imaginary friends. And I'm talking the best composers. For example, people like Eric Fournier, who created Chez St. John. People like the guys who created the Rugrats. Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. See, that you can read all the theories you like on it, but to me, Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared is it had a personal message for me, and that was, don't worry about your imagination. If you've got these imaginary friends, don't worry about it, and don't let other people worry about it. You can take these imaginary friends anywhere. I mean, if you look at episode 6 of Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, which I'll talk about properly in another podcast, but if you look at episode 6, the bit where you see Red Guy, he's in the workplace, and he's saying, just imagine if one of these files came alive. He starts singing a song, and his boss goes, that sounds really boring, and then he goes to a bar and sings the creativity song. Now that is basically what happened to me. The early stages of secondary school, that's basically me. And people saying, no, this is wrong, or members of family saying, this is wrong, you should be normal and never have imaginary friends, and you should get rid of them. And it's saying no because having imaginary friends builds on creativity or helps you deal with life. For me, it helped me deal with life because the people I had as friends didn't really help me deal with life. And I'll talk about it on other episodes on relationships and stuff. Now, through college, I tried to hold my imaginary friends in. But unfortunately, it wasn't healthy. So when I left college and came home and rebuilt the community, and things were really good, and in a way it helped me get through things, and it did help me get through a bad patch of a relationship, which I'll talk about in another nearly said video then podcast. But I do think that that it is important to have imaginary friends. You may not have to talk to them, but knowing that they're there. I don't believe this, talking to yourself inside your head. It doesn't work. It's a load of bollocks, and it's like holding something in, and it's like holding all your emotions in. And I'm angry at my parents for trying to tell me that, but not angry at them because it wouldn't help me be rebellious today, and it wouldn't help me help other people like me. I guess it's kind of that way, and sometimes you need to be taught to be rebellious. It's a strange thing, I know, and the way to be taught to be rebellious is people telling you no, something's wrong. You know if something's wrong. It's like if I told you not to think of a white bear, you would think of a white bear immediately because you're told not to do it. And so basically that's another thing that I'll come to a different episode, because again, it's an interesting thing. What's right and wrong? If for instance I was told to basically to not listen to Justin Bieber, you'll go listen to Justin Bieber because you know it's wrong and you wouldn't listen to it. And so it's basically that's what we do because we know it's wrong. We'll go and do it because that's what we do. We don't tend to do the right things so much because they're boring, and if it's okay to do something, we won't do it so much because it's boring. My imaginary friends now, they're not as active because people aren't telling me it's wrong so much. So the things are more active, and I try and use my imaginary friends to learn from situations. So that's all I have to say on this. And I hope you join me again for another podcast. This has been pre-recorded. It's not a live podcast. I don't do these podcasts live. I record them, then I put them out. That's basically what I do. But I love doing this podcast, and I'm doing it to communicate with you as much as spread the information. And I suggest you go and check out the Imaginary Friends blog. It's on Facebook, and I hope you guys find it, like it, and comment on it, and share it with all your friends. It's there for discussion. So it's not there to make people uncomfortable. That's not the whole idea of it. If I was going to do that, I would do something completely different. Sorry I sound depressed, guys. I'm a little knackered. My brain is thinking of something. And that's just a little bit that I wanted to say. Before I leave the podcast, the next time I do the Imaginary Friends, it'll be more on like a radio play type thing, so you can hear the Imaginary Friends, you can hear me acting them out and everything. It'll give more of a story. I'll put some sound effects in. It'll make something more enjoyable. So really, guys, I hope you have enjoyed this podcast. I'm now going to edit it so you guys can listen to it. But as always, I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. And watch out for more podcasts. Goodbye for now.